Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary with Carl and Laura Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion or simply want to ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to invite you to join our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that would resonate with and challenge us and our fellow seekers here in the desert.
We believe that a key to the journey is to keep asking good questions, and we believe that all stories are sacred.
Our hope is that you will find life and healing for your body and mind, and that you will be able to be where you are and be who you are.
And now, here is our show. Hi, welcome to the Desert Sanctuary podcast. I'm Laura Forehand. I am here with Carl Forehand, and we are going to get started tonight because we're, I think, in for a real treat. This is a podcast that I listen to. We have Anonymous Andrew and Melody Post here from Cultimatum, the Culture of Cults and Human Trafficking podcast, which I am very much into. I love their podcast. And so I'm so excited to have them joining us on our podcast this evening. So welcome so much to the Desert Sanctuary podcast, Andrew and Melody.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Absolutely.
So I may have trouble concentrating tonight because Laura just got home from a week of being gone.
Wow.
And so I might as well derail us here anyhow. So Melody and Andrew, we're glad you're here. We're super glad you're here. We had a little trouble scheduling, but here we are and plenty of time. It's fine.
Absolutely.
So what we like to hear from people is their stories. We think stories are sacred. And when people tell them it does something for them, it's hard for them sometimes to tell their story, but it helps them and it helps us. And we've learned so much over the years hearing people's survivor stories and, the different things they're doing out here in what we call the desert, this area of nomads and spiritual seekers or whatever we are, deconstructing. But we hear so many stories and it's just been really good for us. And sometimes we worry too much about making this into a speech, but we worry a little bit too much about who's following us and how many people listened, forgetting that just telling our stories and listening to stories, I think we should have spent less time listening to preachers and we should have been listening to each other. And during the pandemic, we could have done that, but I think we found other non-helpful things to do during the pandemic. So here we are, though, in 2024. We're glad you're here. We'll start with Melody. Is that all right? If we start with you and just tell us whatever part of your story you want to and in whatever detail.
Well, I was part of a cult called the House of Yahweh. I joined with my parents when I was 15. In 1989. I was engaged by the time I was 16, married by the time I was 18, also pregnant when I was 18, moved to Texas during that time. My family is originally from Michigan, so I moved away from my mom and dad and my sister because I actually was the only one in my family that actually moved down and was actually lived in near the cult and was kind of that integral into it. I had my first baby when I was 19, and I think my faith in that religion started to really crumble when they started teaching the multiple marriage teaching, and that was right around the time that I was pregnant when they started teaching this, and so I was already emotional and sensitive, and you gain weight when you're pregnant, and I felt very vulnerable, and I know that and I saw the pain this was causing my mother-in-law at the same time, because the leader was my father-in-law, and basically they started teaching multiple marriage because he got caught cheating on his wife with a secretary, and he said, "Oh, I haven't sinned. I would never sin. This is no sin. I'm not a sin. She's just my concubine or another wife. So I have done nothing wrong." And my mother-in-law was crushed, of course. She was devastated, and I was working directly with her at that time. So I saw her pain and her devastation on a daily basis. And I just kept telling my husband, their son, that I see the pain your mom's going through. I just can't imagine a creator would put this pain on anyone. This is awful. I mean, she's hurting. It's like she was grieving. You could just hear when she would cry. It was that grieving kind of cry, just that deep, guttural, painful cry. And I shortly after that, I was ended up getting excommunicated because I did not and would not conform to this teaching. I struggled during that time. I would kind of say, oh, maybe I have to. And then I'd go, oh, but I just don't think I can. And it was a struggle for me because I felt like, well, I have to. This is my faith. I have to believe this. But I couldn't make myself just dive into it. I was just like, because then the next day I'd be like, oh, no, I can't do it. Just can't do it. And so that was, I was excommunicated actually July of 1994. So this year is actually 30 years out for me. So I've been out for quite a while.
Wow.
I did struggle to adjust and struggled with my deconstruction afterward with the brainwashing and trying to believing that if I worked on Saturday, which we believed was the Sabbath, that I was going to burn in hell. And I had anxiety with things like that. I didn't eat pork for 17 years. I didn't put a Christmas tree in my house for 17 years because some of those beliefs I held on to long after I left the physical place. They still had part of my mind. They still were controlling me mentally, even though I wasn't there physically anymore, which is kind of hard to explain if you haven't been there. If you've been there, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But I ended up moving back to Michigan after I was excommunicated, and my husband came with me. Our marriage didn't last much longer after that. We were separated by 1995. So less than a year after we moved, and then divorced by 96. And I met my current husband shortly after that. And he's super supportive. I mean, I tried to scare the guy away on our first date. I told him everything about the cult and thinking, if he's going to run, let's just have him do it now. I don't want to make this a long drawn out process. I'm just laying it all out on the table. If he's going to be scared and run, let him do it now. But he didn't. He was intrigued. He was like, well, that's interesting. Tell me more. And I'm like, okay, well, this is not the response I expected. So then I started a Facebook group for ex-members of just my cult back in around 2009, 2010-ish. And then I started the Cult Escape and Recovery group in 2020, along with a YouTube channel that didn't last very long, but and then I when I did the YouTube channel, really wanted to do a podcast. And this is where Andrew comes in, because I don't think by chance. I think because I kept thinking, well, I want to do a podcast, but I just don't think I could do it alone. And then Andrew actually joined the Cult Escape and Recovery group and posted in the group and said that he was looking for people who are willing to share their cult stories. And I'm like, I'll go on his podcast. I'll share my story. And then after we did the interview, he's like, yeah, don't leave right away. He's like, I got a question for you. And then he was like, what would you think about? First, it was just he wanted me to come on Anonymous Andrew and just help him do a small series within his podcast for cults. But then we had so much interest in it that we had so many people interested. He's like, this is kind of taking over my original podcast. I'm thinking I'm going to need to do 2 podcasts. So if Andrew wants to take over from there and kind of, tell how that went and his part of that story.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. So Melody's spot on. My story starts around 2015. I was a drunk and an alcoholic, and I entered into recovery and started a new chapter in my life at the age of 55, I think it was. And I have always been a serial relationship dater. Like I would get into relationships, they would not sustain, like maybe a year, maybe 18 months, and then they would crumble. And then I would just jump into another relationship. And this went on not only all my life, but even through sobriety. I thought maybe it was sobriety because before sobriety, my relationship crumbled because of my alcoholism. So who wants to stay with a drunk? So in my sobriety, the same, I was finding the same issues. I was finding women and dating and getting into relationships, and then they would leave, or they would just stop. It was the third relationship in my sobriety that I thought that I had met. Let's try to be careful with the words here, but let's just say it. I thought I met my soulmate. I thought I met my twin flame. I thought I met my better half. Fill in the blank.
Mhm.
And she was an absolutely stunning, beautiful Latina, and didn't look a day over her age, she was 55 at the time, and she looked whatever. I fell so hard for her, and but ignoring many, 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 many red flags. And so the relationship went on for about a year. It was beautiful for the first year, and then it started to crumble like the other ones. They started to fall apart. But this one was a little different. There was a lot of gaslighting. There was a lot of cheating and infidelity and deception, uh, disappearing acts, but I thought that I would never find anybody as beautiful as her, and again, she was my soulmate. That I hung in there, and I hung in there way too long, like way past its expiration date. And it was about 2.5 years. I finally realized that I'm being played and I needed to get out. So I did. But I was an absolute wreck and shell of a man. And somewhat like Melody, I had always wanted a podcast. I was a big podcast aficionado. I had been listening to podcasts for 5, 10 years, whatever, as long as they've been around. And after 3 months of being depressed and not coming out of my bedroom because I was so upset with myself, I decided to start a podcast. So I wanted to tell my story. I said, I wanted to get my story out there and see if anybody had a similar journey. And so I started the Anonymous Andrew podcast, Life and the Choices We Make, because I was making poor choices. The Anonymous Andrew part is a play on my sobriety. Now, the podcast has absolutely nothing to do with sobriety. Absolutely nothing. I talk about it once in a while, but it's not part of the story. But I just like the name Anonymous Andrew because I was going to tell the story about this Latina, but I didn't want to out her. I didn't want to name her. I didn't want to put out her name or any kind of identification about her. I was concerned about blowback and or any, getting a cease and desist letter or whatever.
Mhm.
She has some powerful friends, and so that's why I went with the Anonymous Andrew. I just said I figured let me just be anonymous, and people maybe would never figure out who I am. And to this day, I try to keep that anonymity in place. But after doing this, I'm starting season 3 in a month, so it beyond my wildest dreams. I didn't think I would get past 6 months. I thought I'd tell my story and it would just fizzle out, and I did the podcast to try to heal, and it kind of took off. It kind of, it's not a viral podcast by any means, but I opened up a YouTube channel, and before you know it, I had 10,000 downloads, and I had a following, and uh, people were lining up to be on the podcast. So along that journey, I was approached by a woman in England who came to me and said, there's this cult called the Twin Flames Universe, and they are based in Michigan, and they are horrible, and they're doing horrible things, and they're preying on the weak and vulnerable. And I'll just quickly explain to the audience if they haven't heard about them. They are selling the idea that we will find your twin flame for you, but you have to pay us this money to take these courses, and we'll teach you how to find your twin flame. And the twin flames concept comes from Greek mythology. Anyway, this woman from London believed in the Greek mythology concept of the twin flames and said to me that the twin flames cult was doing an abomination to the Greek mythology concept, which was real, and she was following it. There's an actual protocol you follow, like 7 steps to follow, and then you become that person. You and them become a twin flame. And she wanted me to do somewhat like of a documentary. She wanted to come on and talk about it. And since it was somewhat romance related because she was engaged to this gentleman in London, I said, sure. But along the way, of course, before that, she says, oh, by the way, you have to watch these 2 documentaries on Netflix and Amazon, which were these big documentaries that they did about the Twin Flames universe cult. And I was captivated immediately. I was disgusted by what I saw. And this woman came on and told her story, and we released it. And at the time, we released it in a group called Escaping Twin Flames. There was a couple of Facebook groups. And next thing I know, I had people coming forward wanting to also talk about it. And next thing I know, I'm doing what I call like a mini pod series. But I had taken a left turn from my theme of my podcast. So now I'm doing cults about the Twin Flames universe, doing like this investigation into them. And I was enjoying it and I was learning a lot. And I found like my calling. I said, wow, I want to investigate cults. And that's how I met Melody. I was looking up other Facebook groups that had cult themes, and what I came across Melody's. I think it's Melody's Cult and Recovery.
Cult Escape,
yeah, Cult Escape and Recovery. And like she said, I posted in there. I'm looking. So at that point, I hadn't decided to branch out yet. I still had the Anonymous Andrew podcast, but then I started getting emails from my audience saying, "This is not what we are tuning in for. We don't want to hear about cults." So I had approached. I asked Melody to come on, and she told her story. And just like she said at the end of the podcast, at the end of the episode, I said to her, I'm looking for a co-host. And I had always wanted a co-host on the Anonymous Andrew podcast, but it didn't make any sense because that was my story. So having a co-host wouldn't really, but I said to her, let's start a podcast about cults and like do an investigation. Or at that point, we really didn't have a playbook figured out yet. And when was that, Melody? Earlier this year?
Yeah.
March?
I want to say April, May.
April, May?
April, May. I think our first episode dropped on Cultimatum the end of April, if I remember correctly.
It looks like you've been busy since then.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, my podcast has kind of taken a back seat. Melody and I have worked very closely together, and I'm going to be right up front here. The idea was that Melody was going to come on because I had not been in a cult. So while I wanted to investigate cults and have people come on and tell their stories, I was not sure how to handle. So let's say somebody comes on to tell their story and they start crying or they start talking about what they went through, the trauma. I wasn't prepared for that. And I wanted somebody like Melody to be an advocate, a supporter, to help me navigate that. And
there's some unspoken rules to it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's things you can't say, there's things you shouldn't say.
Exactly.
Words you should use. And
I didn't know any of that.
Yeah.
So Melody came on board. We did a couple of episodes. And then before I knew it, she had my grammar. Where's my grammar? She dove in. Yeah, she jumped in with both feet and started doing the artwork and promos and going out and getting guests. Way more than I anticipated. I just thought she would show up for an episode and record and that would be it. And if it wasn't for Melody, I don't think we would be where we are today. I am the technical end of it. You know, I run the podcast technical end, the editing, the music, and the platform in which it's distributed, and yada yada yada. But Melody is the one that lines up the guests, and she schedules the guest, and actually schedules the episodes. So you two, who we interviewed a couple of weeks ago, you're going to be out this weekend.
Yes.
But that's what Melody does. Melody will schedule who's next. She has the best idea. Because one week we might have a Jehovah's Witness guest, and then the next week it's somebody else. And so Melody knows how to space them out, or how to put who before who. And that brings us current. I could not have picked a better partner, and Melody and I have become great co-hosts and friends and business partners.
Yes.
While we're not making any money, but
Yeah.
and maybe someday we will. But
Welcome
I
to
don't
that.
think that's what drives us.
No.
What drives us
Right.
is giving the platform to. I had Carl and Laura, I had no idea how many cults there were out there, and I had no idea how many people were being affected by this.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing these, Melody, what do we have? 20 this weekend? It'll be 23, 24 episodes?
Well, Carl and Laurel's going to be 25.
25.
But we have 30 because we have five in the
can.
shadows
Okay.
waiting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I had no idea that there was this going on. And then there's one thing we didn't mention. There's also human trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
I met a few people along the way who were human trafficked, and I felt that needed to be talked about as well. So we mixed that in into the podcast. So it's a culture of cults and human trafficking. And because what a victim of human trafficking goes through is as traumatic, if not more, than some cults, depending on the cult. So,
And I'm going to say there's some similarities as well, because there's a lot of gaslighting and brainwashing that goes on with human trafficking that is similar to what goes on when you're in a cult too.
And trauma that just,
yes,
and then the healing and transitioning back. And also, I'm finding that people who leave cults, who are afraid to, people who come on our podcast, a lot of times they want to be anonymous, and I don't blame them. But the human trafficking people are even more afraid because they're in hiding.
Right.
So if they got out of a trafficking ring, these guys do not let you go that easy.
Right.
No. So it's been quite the journey of learning the dark underbelly of cults and human trafficking.
So I have questions for both of you, but let me ask you this, because I think that's really important that you mentioned that, Andrew, that there's this, you hear these stories and some of them are incredibly dark. So how do you take care of yourselves when you're listening to these stories?
I'm going to let Melody answer that first, because she is a survivor, and I think it triggers her more, and then I'll answer.
I will say that I was having more problems in the beginning with some triggering. Certain stories hit me harder than others. And I will say that I won't lie, there are stories that have actually caused me to have nightmares. Even dreaming about being back in my cult, being trapped, trying to get out. And that's been difficult. But I think what I've done and learned through that is I wake up, I'm like, okay, I'm good. I'm not there. I'm here. I'm in my peace, my new peaceful life I've made for myself. I'm not in that place anymore, which, that calms me immediately. But I think some of that you have to be willing to take on, because if you're an empathetic person, it's hard to not do that. And so some of that you're going to absorb a little. But I think by being empathetic and feeling some of their pain and absorbing some of that, I'm going to get emotional. I wasn't going to do that.
That's fine.
It's all good.
I think it's part of our healing. It's to connect as human beings and to have that empathy for one another. And that's really my goal in doing this podcast really is to give this platform to people, and I think that sometimes that means listening to hard things,
Yeah.
and dealing with the hard truth, and the truth is not always easy. Sometimes the truth is just painful. And so I just, and I wake up and I'm just grateful that I am where I am. And I love hearing the success and
Yes.
people's recovery. And when you hear their sad part of their story, and then they tell us where they are today, and so you go from those really low lows to the high highs in sometimes the same episode, usually in the same episode, because they have recovered. And so you also get that too, which you can almost celebrate with them, because you've heard what they've been through, and then you're like, but look where they are now, and look what they're doing. And a lot of them are becoming advocates and doing things to help others,
Writing
because
books,
I think that's
starting podcasts.
Yep.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so my answer to that was I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And it was a more, I don't say culture shock. When I started hearing some of these stories, so at the beginning of each episode, Melody and I do a very big disclaimer about, that you're going to hear sensitive subjects like rape and child abuse, torture, and whatever. We give a big disclaimer that, this is not for the faint of heart. And I did not know what I was about to hear. I heard stuff that made my skin crawl, and I think we can just say it. The Jehovah's Witness, that we've had 3 already survivors come on, and the Luz de Mundo. I could name a bunch of them where children as young as 6 years old were molested in the church, in Jehovah's Witness hall. One of them, he would drag the 6-year-old out of the service into the bathroom and molest her. And while Melody, I hope this comes across right. While Melody was able to, I got angry. Maybe I watch, and I always say this, maybe I watch too much TV. We're coming up on an election year. Jesus, it's a couple of months away.
Yeah.
You listen to what the politicians today are talking about, and right here in our own backyard, there are these children that are being trafficked. There are children that are in these religious so-called organizations that are being molested or forced to work all hours.
Yeah.
And one of them, I heard that they had to kneel on a broomstick. And I know that it sounds kind of not so, to me, that sounded harsh, but it was one of the Amish people. I think they had to kneel on a broomstick when they were punished. I got angry, and I called out law enforcement, and I said, we even had somebody on, Melody helped me, the woman that wrote the book, and her brother was in a cult.
Paulette Buchanan.
Buchanan. The law enforcement looks the other way, and I every episode I call them out. Like, when are you going to do something about this? And I guess maybe I shouldn't. Maybe it's not the law enforcement. I guess it's the politicians that have to rewrite the laws. These religious organizations are getting away with, in some cases, murder, and people are taking their own lives, and children are being molested, and I don't see anything being done about it. And this Twin Flames universe cult, they flaunt their wealth. They put out these videos, and they talk about how wealthy they are, and the law enforcement in one of the documentaries went to interview them, and they asked them a couple questions and they walked out and said thank you for the time. Now, again, I always put the disclaimer: I don't know if the FBI or any law enforcement has a task force working on this, but I don't hear about anything being done, and this really, I'm going to say, it pisses me off.
Yeah.
So that's my side of how I handle what I'm hearing. Makes me angry and makes me want to keep going. And
Yeah.
and
Yeah. And we are noticing there's, like you said, someone alluded to it earlier, that there are so many people now that are speaking up, that are talking. The Me Too
yeah,
movement and some of those things helped, but a lot of them are, not only are they adapting back to society and healing their wounds and so on, but like you also alluded to, um, they're leading things that are going to help, um, including pushing. I think a lot of people that go back into church then push for procedures to prevent those kind of things from happening.
well,
It's
Carl, when we interviewed you, that you had one, if I remember correctly, one story after the other, that every time you went to a new church and they made you pastor, you would bring in your own style of pastoring. Forgive me for not knowing how to word it correctly,
yeah,
but you told us that they had a board of men who already decided how you were going to run that church.
right.
You know, so
Yeah, you have very narrow lanes that you can
yeah,
operate in,
and
basically.
you weren't told, right? You showed up at these churches thinking you were going to run this nice little town, and Melody and I still talk about it. The dance that you did with your wife and that nice little slow
Oh
dance.
yeah,
Yeah, it blows my mind that
right.
it's just silly. And but I'm gonna go off on a rant. I'm known for my rant, so I gotta rein it back in.
That's fine. So, are there patterns? What are you learning? I know you haven't been going very long on the new podcast, but you've listened to a lot of survivor stories, and in Melody, you probably know a lot of survivors. As you listen to the stories, and like we've been talking about, it's not easy. It's not easy
No.
for them or us, either one, to listen to. But have you noticed patterns? What is it
Oh
that you most
gosh.
want to tell people about what you've learned?
Patterns when in the cult, I'll just throw this out here that to start with is that a lot of them are run so similar and they teach such similar things that I have literally said, do these cult leaders join a group where they get a playbook and they all just
Huh.
know how to do this? I mean,
Uh-huh.
where is this coming from? Because I talk to people that are in different cults, totally different cults than mine. And they're like, we did this, my leader did this, and they controlled this. And I'm like, were we in the same cult? Is this a bizarro
Yeah.
world? Because it seems like that was my life in just a different cult.
Yeah,
And so that's the similarities within the
Yeah.
cult.
One
The
common denominator we found
Yes.
were and I joke about this, but it's not funny, is like these organizations that become cults. It's like the Chinese menu. They choose two from column A, two from column B. And so one cult will follow the Jewish religion, but they'll take a playbook out of the second. You know what I'm saying? Melly, you can
Yeah.
help me out
Yeah.
here.
Mormons or yeah.
Yeah, they pick and choose. And yeah, if you look at the common denominator of many of these cults, they all have the same playbook.
Yeah.
yeah. And where'd they get it from? I don't
Yeah.
know.
I don't know.
Yeah. So what about the people that are healing? What do you think, in your opinion, just from the things you've observed, the stories you've listened to, what are the most important things for coming out of a situation like that, coming out of a high control church, a high control family, um, suffering through those things? when you come out, what's the most important things you've learned just by hearing the repetition?
I will
How to
say
get better?
that for me, for what I have observed, and this is even true for me, is that when you are in a cult, they have a tendency to make you very fearful of the world outside of the group.
Yeah.
Everything outside is dangerous. Everyone outside is dangerous. And I think that the thing that the unified truth that I hear in our interviews over and over again is that that's the people come out and they find out that that's not true. There are lots of kind and loving people in the world that maybe don't even belong to a church and are just willing to help you because they're kind-hearted. And everybody out in the world is not evil and cruel and out to get you.
Right.
And I think that that is a unified truth that most of, and I'm going to say us as being a fellow cult survivor, figure out when we leave, is that there are people out there and they do want to help. And that's I think that's a really reassuring thing for anybody that might be listening to our podcast that might still be in a cult and having doubts and scared to leave for just that reason, to just hear that there are lots of good people out there and that you don't really need to be that as scared as the group or the cult wants you to be. I think that's an element of control that they use. It's that fear is a way of controlling people, and they use that fear to keep you there.
Do you guys figure that that's a cult? That's a full blown cult. But do you think in almost every church there's some level of that isolating behavior that keep you there
I
a
do.
lot? And
I do. I will say that, and I'm going to say that because I tried to go to some regular churches when I left, and I do think that there's an element that, and I think the reason is that they have to keep you there. What's going to keep you there? There has to be something that's keeping you there, and if they tell you, well, if you leave, you're not going to have salvation. That's a means of control and fear,
right.
even if it's not in a culty way, but to say you're going to go to hell if you leave, that's a means of that's a fear tactic,
Right.
and a way of controlling you that isn't necessarily culty, but it certainly is a controlling behavior.
Yeah. It's definitely cult like. That's what I say.
Yes.
But
Yes.
all of them are at least cult like.
Right.
For
Well,
sure.
I was going to, and I had to step out for a second. We said before we even started recording that our grandson was asleep. I might have to leave. So you might have asked this question. So if you did, forgive me. But have you had anyone from, and I'll use air quotes, a mainstream religion come on the podcast? Maybe saying that, like Southern Baptist or Catholic or,
Southern Baptist for sure.
But I'm saying that have come on your podcast to talk about a cult like experience in that particular denomination.
Yes. And I'm actually looking for that episode here on my little list, my little cheat list here that I have, because I'm thinking of somebody very in particular. Do you remember the girl who wrote the book, Andrew? Real soft-spoken lady, very sweet, and I believe she was Baptist too. For some reason I'm not seeing the episode coming out for some reason, but I'm gonna pull it up. But yes, she was Baptist, and I can't think of the name of her name. But she was from a small Baptist church, and she felt that it was a very culty experience, or at the very least, let's say a high control group.
Yeah.
If you wanna say something like a little bit softer and a little bit more moderate and less extreme, because the word cult, it took me years to actually even call the House of Yahweh when I left. It took me years to use the word cult because I'm like, oh no, they're not a cult. They're just a religion, and I just am not part of it anymore.
Melody,
it took me years before I realized I was in a cult.
Right.
Melody and I are going to do an episode in the next few months explaining what a cult is. So what's the criteria that makes a cult?
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So I
good.
grew up in the Roman Catholic Church.
Mhm.
My mother and father were very much involved, and I was dragged to church every Sunday, and I was in the choir, and I was an altar boy, and but I question whether the Catholic Church is a cult, but they have cult-like tendencies. They
Right.
Hmm.
um, when I was growing up, I went to Catholic school, and the nuns beat us to a pulp. So, there's corporal punishment. Um, but in the Catholic Church, while they may brainwash you or teach you things that they, like, especially like birth control and abortion and all that, you can think for yourself and you can walk away. And which I did. I finally walked away and just said, this is just not what I believe in,
Mm.
because I knew there would be no consequences if I walked away. But like what Melody was talking about earlier, a lot of these cults will tell you if you leave, you're going to burn in hell, you're going to get cancer, you're going to die. They give you all these horrible scenarios. But I don't think the Hebrew religion, the norm, not the maybe Hasidics and Orthodox, but the mainstream, the Jewish religion and the Catholic religion, and maybe the Episcopals and all that,
Mm.
I don't think they're cults, but I think they may have some cult. So Melody and I are going to create. Uh, I think we're going to have to pick a night where we're going to sit down and come
Yes.
up with a list of what makes an organization a cult.
Hmm.
I think that'll be a really interesting podcast. I mean, I will definitely be tuning in because, that was one of my big questions when we left the church and started deconstructing. I felt like there were just too many similarities. And so maybe saying that mainstream religion is cult like is where we're at. But, and yes, we were able to walk away. Um, but I agree with you, Melody, that a lot of times that um, threat of hell is a very real thing that keeps people in, even though they can quote unquote walk away. But also, when we walked away, we lost a huge sense of community.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, people did not talk to us. I mean, it
Yeah.
was like we had fallen off the face of the earth.
Yep.
That was very um, that was very painful for me
Disheartening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
because we're supposed to be different from the world, right?
Right.
Religion, that's what they say inside the church, that we're not, we're in the world but not of it. And yet so much of what I saw was paralleled the world, really. So
Yes.
anyway.
And I'm sure that they teach the parishioners the similar things that the people in my cult were taught, is that you can't talk to the fallaways
That's right.
because they might get into your head and then they'll cause you to sin and fall away.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that it's similar.
And there's one thing we didn't bring up earlier, which I think is very important. Many, many cults will separate you from your family, other than the
Oh yeah.
cults like Melody, where she
Yes.
grew up in the cult. So when people are born into a cult, but if people join a cult like Twin Flames, they're 18 years old, 19, and they join Twin Flames and they get really involved, they will separate you from your family. If you watch the documentaries on Amazon and Netflix, there are family members that came on and they cannot talk to their daughters, their sisters, their family members. And
Right.
so that's one of the criteria that I think will be at the top of the list, is that a cult will not allow you to talk to your family.
And I can tell you that we were allowed to talk to my extended family, but my cult put a very big wedge between us and my grandparents, because
Mm.
my grandparents were telling us, "You're in a cult. You're in a cult."
Mm.
But we weren't, because we didn't celebrate Christmas. We weren't allowed to accept Christmas presents from my grandparents anymore because that was pagan. We weren't allowed to accept birthday gifts because that was pagan. And this was all extremely hurtful, especially to my grandma, because she was
Right.
one of those people that giving gifts was part of her love language, and she loved to do that for us, and she felt very deprived in not being able to do that for her grandchildren, and it was really painful, and it put a huge wedge in my relationship with my grandparents.
And I think we don't realize enough. I think in regular church, you talk about separating people from their families. Well, we went to church a lot with our immediate family, but my extended family, they want Christmas Eve service. We want to have Easter at the church. We want to have several services a week. It's intended to keep you there, like Melanie mentioned earlier, because that's how they indoctrinate, it's how they control, and it's how they ease their fear of whatever they think is out there.
Can I ask kind of a follow-up question of that? Or are you done with your question?
Go ahead.
I don't wanna, okay.
Go ahead.
Well, I thought about this, Melody, while you were telling your story, but because you said that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you kind of grabbed onto your particular cult a little stronger than, I'm guessing, like your parents and maybe some siblings and stuff, because you moved to Texas and all that. So what was it that drew you in your opinion, a little bit stronger?
I will tell you, it was a few things. I think that the biggest thing was that it was a doomsday cult, and they taught the end of the world was coming, and we needed to be prepared.
Here.
And I was afraid of that, but part of what my fear was based on is the fact that I knew from being a young child I wanted to have children. I wanted to be a mother. And I thought that time was running out for me. Here I am, 15, and I'm thinking, I need to get married and have a baby if I want to be a mother, because the world's going to end and I may not have my chance. And I did not want to miss out on that. I wanted to be a mom. And, in hindsight, here we are 30 years later, the world still hasn't ended.
Right.
And I'm thinking, and not that I would change any of what happened. Everything happens for a reason. I believe that. And I have the children I have the life I have. Did it put me on a totally different trajectory of where my life was going? Absolutely. I was college bound when I joined the House of Yahweh. I was going to go to school. I was going to become a preschool teacher. I had it all planned out. I knew what I was going to do.
Right. Right.
That's good.
But I do think that was a big pull for me. And so that was why I, pushed and begged my parents to let me get married as young as I did. Because my dad made me wait till I graduated high school. Thank God he made me get my diploma before he let me get married, because a lot of people didn't do that.
Yeah.
So I was one of the lucky ones in that aspect.
There's one more thing that I just wanted to mention that I just recently learned. So, like the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I'm picking on them more now because we've had more guests on. They were started around 1776 or something.
That sounds right.
By a man who came forward and said that the Catholic religion, the Jewish religion, the Episcopals, the Muslims, they were all pagan religions, and they were all wrong, and they had the Bible wrong, but yet they borrowed from them anyway. And so the Jehovah's Witnesses teach that the Catholic Church, the Muslims, and all that their religions are wrong, and yet their religions have been around for 2,000 to 4,000 years, way before Jehovah's Witnesses came along. So why does this man in 1767 come along and say, these other religions don't matter, it's our religion? And then he borrows from the other religions, but they're bad. Stay away from them. So
Right.
So anyway, I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah. So the podcasts are called the Anonymous Andrew Podcast and Cultimatum. We've watched both of them. We've also talked to you and interviewed you before. We like to ask people this question, and we'll ask it to both of you. And we never prepare you for this question, but it's the billboard question. So the billboard question is, if you had a billboard that everyone could see, what would you put on your billboard? can be as long or as short as you want. Laura says it can be long because it's your billboard. It's your business if you want to cause wrecks on the highway. But what is a phrase or something that's central to you that you would want to say to the world?
I have my answer already, but
Okay, go ahead.
Mel, Mila, are you still thinking?
I've got my answer. I only have to answer for Cultimatum, right?
Sure.
I mean, I could come up with an answer for Anonymous Andrew too, but I'll come up with an answer for Cultimatum.
Oh,
My answer.
yeah, I'm thinking Cultimatum too, but
Oh, okay.
I could give you a billboard for Anonymous Andrew, but we're really here for Cultimatum. But Melody, you go first.
I'm going to say it's a phrase that I've recently started adding to the end of every episodes, which is stay safe, stay informed, and remember you're not alone.
It's good.
It's really good.
I'm writing it down.
I'm going to steal that for the Anonymous Andrew. I think I like that one. That's because I'm teaching people to watch out for the gaslighters and the cheaters and the infidelity and the red flags, and that kind of fits in. But my billboard for Cultimatum, or just my mantra that I try to live by, is very simple: live and let live.
Okay.
You know what you do behind closed doors, as long as it's not hurting a child or an animal, is your business.
Yeah.
And it's not my business to tell you what belief or what God you should believe in, what sex you should do, what gender whatever is your belief. So I let you do that, and you let me do what I need to do. Live and let live. That's my billboard.
And the side note to that is that in trying to tell everybody what to do and control what everybody does, there's much more damage than been done than the people just being authentic. And like you said, it's with consenting adults and so on, but forcing our faith, forcing our beliefs, forcing our thinking or our practices or our morals on somebody else. Murder is wrong. Hurting children is wrong.
Right.
And harming people is wrong. But who people love, where they go to church, that's not necessarily my business.
Correct.
Speak up about what I think and believe, but
it's not my place to say what you can do, as long as you're not breaking the society's. We live in a civil society. The United States was formed 200 and something years ago because we didn't like the way we were being taxed in Britain. So we came over here. But of course, there's a bunch of laws that you can't drive recklessly. You can't go through red lights. As long as you abide by society's laws, and nobody gets hurt, like a child, like I said, like an animal or a child. I guess it's somewhat almost like the Ten Commandments. If I'm not a big, I couldn't recite the Ten Commandments, but I just think about don't hurt thy neighbor, or don't covet thy neighbor's wife, don't kill. Just follow that, and you do what you do, and I'll do what I do, and I'm not going to judge you. You don't judge me.
Yeah,
I do like that.
Yeah.
The no judgment thing is big with me too. I have to agree with that on Andrew's part. I actually read a book called More Jesus, Less Religion as I was leaving my cult that helped me simplify a lot of and deconstruct a lot of my beliefs. It was actually a book that my dad had found and recommended to me, and that did help me to just simplify and get it down to the nitty gritty about not really being about religious rituals, so to speak, or rules. It's more simple than that. It's really about how we feel about and how we treat each other.
Right.
I'll plug someone to you. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I want to mention someone. I want to tell you about someone, I guess is what I want to say. Pete Singer took over for Boz, who was Billy Graham's grandson, at a thing called Grace. It's godly response to abuse and Christian
I don't know,
experiences or
but
something
it's an
like
acronym.
it's something like that. But what they do is they go into churches and they help them write policies to prevent abuse. Then they follow up, and when something's happened and someone's been abused, they come in and investigate. And they always run up against the idea of, well, that might ruin our church, or that might have to fire our pastor and he'll lose his job. And he said that, first of all, that's not the main concern.
Mm-hmm.
The concern should be the things that are important. And he said, when you talk about things that are important, maybe let's just talk about it this way. How about love your neighbor? How about do no harm?
Correct. Yeah, I agree.
Those simple things. And I think that's what people, religions are very worried about losing their parishioners because they won't know what to think and so on. But I see a lot more coming out of religion, deconstructing and healing, and living very simple, moral lives that,
Yes.
um, make adult decisions, and sex in your sex life and so on. You make choices, and you still have to do that, right? It's not magically better like Christianity promised it would be. It's just love your neighbor and don't hurt people.
But Carl, and I agree with you 100%. So if you want to become a born again Christian, if you want to become a Jews for Jesus, or any of that, go to church, go to the mountaintop and sing it, but don't come knocking on my door and try to tell me that my way of thinking or my belief system is wrong. And Jehovah's Witness does that, and I can't name many others, but there's too many in America today. We're divided politically because the one side wants us to think one way, and the other side. So I agree with you. You live by the rule of love thy neighbor, but don't try to force your beliefs onto me.
Right. Absolutely.
And you want to debate about it and tell me how Jesus works for you? I'll listen. But at the end of it, if I say it doesn't work for me, we should part ways and shake hands and say thank you and I wish you luck. But there are people who will just persist on pushing and pushing and pushing.
Yeah. Well, we're hopeful and we're excited for you. It just looks like both your podcasts are going well and moving up and progressing, whatever that means. And you may not ever make any money from them, but there's other kinds of satisfaction.
For sure.
And especially if you're doing a good work and people are responding to it. I love
consider
that.
it a labor of love.
That's right.
I'm real happy for you.
It is. Yeah, and you know what? I've said this to Melody, and I don't know when the time comes. If we ever got a sponsor, if we ever had enough listeners and a sponsor came to us, I would feel kind of a little uneasy about taking money. I would want to vet the sponsor because I don't want to monetize or make money off people's suffering and trauma.
That sounds so similar to Carl and I, where Carl and I stand on a lot of things.
But it costs money to run a podcast.
That's right.
So and like Melody said, it's a labor of love. So at some point, to break even would be nice.
Yes, a delicate balance.
Yeah, there you go.
It definitely is. So where can people find you? You can each tell us where people can find you. Where can we find the podcast? Just all the things. Tell us where we can find you.
Well, I'll start with that, and then I'll hand it over to Melody. So the Cultimatum podcast is under the Anonymous Andrew Podcast Studios. So you can start there. I have a website, anonymousandrewpodcast.com. before we launched Cultimatum, I have all of my own social media. So I'm on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Threads. God, I'm probably forgetting half of them. Just Anonymous Andrew podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Now that we have Cultimatum, Melody, you can list all the Cultimatums that social media and where we can be found.
We have a Facebook page where you can join us. We're on Instagram, Pinterest, TikTok, and now YouTube is our latest. And then of course the podcast itself, you can find it on Apple, Spotify, and iTunes, and anywhere really where you listen to podcasts, pretty much you can find it, including YouTube now.
Yeah.
So, and then the Cult Escape and Recovery Group is also on Facebook, and I know Anonymous Andrew has a Facebook page as well.
Yeah, just a page, not a group. I thought about starting a group. I know you want to wrap up, Carl. I had a woman. I'm back on a dating app. I'm starting to start dating again, and I had a woman come on. She saw that I had a podcast, and she said, "You should become a men's dating coach." And I said, I'm trying to figure out my own love life. I'm not going to be able to help somebody else."
Yeah. We thanks for coming on. We're looking forward to this coming out and people listening to it and listening to your podcast. So I wanted to say real quickly before we go that evolving from religious trauma, we have some AI audio files of the book. So the book's been out for a little while. It's available on paperback and Kindle, but we produced audio files, and those are on the website. So we decided to give it away, like we try to do as much as we can. So it's on the desertsanctuary.org, I think. And just you'll find it there in the menu. It's in the audio file. So,
and I'm going to give you a plug, even though this is going to air after your episode aired. Your episode is going to air this weekend, which is August 5th or 6th or something, third or 4th.
Yeah.
You have been generous enough to give our podcast 5 of your books. Yeah. So we are giving away 5 books to
yes.
Make sure we got enough over there.
we're giving away 5 books to the first 5 listeners who email us. So if anybody who's listening to this listens to that episode that Carl and Laura are on, you feel free to enter the contest. And if you're one of the 5, you'll get a free book.
Yeah,
one of Carl's books.
Yeah, that'll be exciting.
Yes.
Thanks for tuning in today. As always, be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary podcast.
Remember, all who wander in the desert are not lost.
We believe all of our stories are sacred.
We are always here if you need someone to hear your story.
Check out our blog on Papios and also our YouTube channel.
And stay tuned for our Leaning Forward conference.
Remember, we love you.
And be at peace.